Hello folks, my name is Dr. Zachariah Hildenbrand. I'm here with my colleague Dr. Kevin Shug, and we are the Collaborative Laboratories for Environmental Analysis and Remediation at the University of Texas at Arlington. We're coming to you from the Responsible Shale Energy Extraction Conference, which is a very unique event bringing together scientists, concerned citizens, operators, regulators, and technology companies to have an honest series of conversations about environmental stewardship in shale energy.
We'd really like to thank the support of the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation and Earth Day Texas for allowing us to put on this event. We believe that this content that we're going to be providing to those who haven't been able to attend is going to help answer and educate a lot of questions surrounding responsible shale energy extraction. So we hope you enjoy the content.
It is my tremendous pleasure to introduce this panel. We have again, some of the leading experts on shale science here. We're talking about detection and remediation using science to understand air, soil, and water contamination events. We have Dr. Richard Haut from HARC. We have Dr. Bryce Payne from CLEAR. We also have Dr. Rob Jackson from Stanford, one of the forefathers of this field of research. And we have one of the best animal chemists I know, Dr. Doug Carlton, and this is going to be moderated by Jim Malowitz from the Texas Tribune.
Howdy folks, yeah, thanks for coming out. Are we getting Rob up on the screen? Oh, there he is, all right. Yeah, I'm Jim Malowitz. I'm a reporter with the Texas Tribune. I've done a lot on energy and environmental issues in the past, and I'm here with my esteemed panelists here. And I was wondering, just maybe first, if we can have each of the panelists just take about 2 minutes to describe their areas of research, since they do they're kind of varied, to get y'all in the mindset of what they're looking at on a daily basis. And I guess, could we start with you, Bryce?
Me?
Yep.
Is that on from here? I guess my main areas of focus have been methane emissions associated with fracking development in particular, methane emissions in general. From my perspective, methane is kind of like the other elephant in the room. But Rob Jackson is going to be on here with us, and he's heavy into that too. But the other thing here, listening to what's been going on here so far, is that there seems to be, first of all, fracking is scientifically a very complicated subject. The ability to assemble all of the different kinds of information that are necessary to interpret data and information available about, for example, a given contamination event, is typically hasn't been reached yet. I've yet to see a report out of any source, whether it be academic or governmental or industry, that has assembled the necessary expertise in one place at one time to get a definitive answer. I find that very frustrating. So the other part of what seems to be coming, it strikes me here, is that in my career I've been in a position a number of times. I'm one of the behind-the-scenes scientists. I don't show up in public very much. But in that mode, I have worked for both industry and environmental groups and local interest groups. And what I've come to determine, and not so much the local interest groups, to be quite fair, but the environmental activist groups and industry are quite frankly both willing to manipulate the information available to suit their particular agenda.
And could you save that thought, because I do want to get into that conversation a little bit later. But if we could go to Rob Jackson, who's on the screen here from Stanford, and could you talk a little bit about some of the groundbreaking research you have done?
Okay. So how am I?
We can hear you.
All right. So first of all, apologies for not being in person. And I just wanted to get what's going on. I'll forge ahead. Thanks for letting me talk. And I want to cover 3 things. They asked us to just talk for a few minutes and leave lots of time for questions. So I want to acknowledge the amazing transformation in the energy sector occurred in the U.S. You have coal that's dropped 40% in electricity generation and 20% last year. Most of that's made by relatively expensive natural gas, but also by wind and solar. And as an environmental scientist, that transformation is a good thing in my view. So then we look at the subject of business for natural gas. And natural gas has lots of benefits, quality, less water, electric cooling. But we're not getting all of the climate benefit that good from natural gas. We have it that's too high. We just published a study of 8,000 rent well tanks, and this is like the restaurant inspections. And there in Texas, Barnett, absolutely 25 is visible from a helicopter with an infrared camera. But in oil producing areas, it's 1 in 5, it's 20%. And in the dry gas area, Barnett, like 100. So there are parts of Barnett that are emitting a lot more methane, true in the Eagle Ford, true particularly oil and gas plays. So are we, there's still greenhouse gas compared to coal? I think there are. They're not that great. We have a responsibility to bring that emission and leakage up. So that's what I'd like to discuss. Then the second, water contamination. And our group, at Duke, my colleague Edward Payne, and published the first study on hydraulic fracturing and water quality. And I think our work, people's work now has shown that in the majority of cases, water contamination is not occurred. But it can with gas migration, with spills, documented cases of spills, sometimes small. For well integrity, casing and cementing issues, we know that we still have cases where we have thousands of feet of cemented annulus, which is gas to move boats. The best companies aren't there, or the best companies at the time.
Dr. Jackson, I think you're breaking up a little bit. I think we might try to work on the connection a little bit. If you can hold that thought, and then we can go to Doug Carlton at UTA with CLEAR. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your research. You were involved, right, with some of the studies into what's going on in some of the Barnett Shale water, if I'm correct?
Correct, thanks, Jim. So good afternoon, I'm Doug Carlton. As Dr. Hildenbrand mentioned, I'm an analytical chemist, and my expertise is really in separation and detection. And for the past handful of years, my role in CLEAR, the Collaborative Laboratories for Environmental Analysis, has been using that in an environmental format, whether it be groundwater, soil, or other matrices. And really answering the question, people saying, what's in here, tell me everything you can find in here, and in some instances where we're fortunate enough to have various time points, is it changing over time? And so initially we started with some survey studies here in the Barnett Shale region, those being 100 sample studies, and then a few years later 550 groundwater studies looking at privately owned water wells. And then that eventually opened the door to other opportunities to look at some survey work in the Eagle Ford Shale, some time course work across an area of increasing unconventional oil exploration in the Cline Shale, and now we're also in Balmorhea in West Texas in the Alpine High there. And so, you know, as I'm an analytical chemist, and we have this nice collaborative C in our acronym. That allows me to really hone my craft and detect to the best of my abilities, and then rather than overreaching or overstretching interpretations of what these results are, go to the environmental scientists on the team, the hydrogeologists, the toxicologists, to see, does this really matter? Is this anthropogenic? Is it not anthropogenic? In some cases, even consult with the industry about, what are some of the explanations of what's happening here, and what are best practices for us in the lab to get the most conclusive information to disseminate to the general public.
Great. And Dr. Haut with the Houston Advanced Research Center,
Sure.
can you talk a little bit about your expertise and what you bring?
Well, first let me thank Clear. Thank you, Jim, for being the moderator. Thank Clear, Kevin, and Zach for organizing all this, the Mitchell Foundation for funding it and all. I do work at Haut down just north of Houston. We were founded by George Mitchell about 35 years ago. And I've been there about 15 years now. About a dozen years ago, helped pull together, along with somebody from industry, somebody from academia, got together and we started up the Environmentally Friendly Drilling Systems program, or the EFD program. And what we do is that we provide unbiased science to address environmental, societal issues throughout all oil and gas activities. Everything from site selection all the way through natural gas storage. And we are actually working with all stakeholders. We are funded not only by state, local, federal governments, foundations, but also environmental organizations and 20 different industry people or companies in the past as well. And the whole thing is to ensure that responsible, accountability is incorporated into the oil and gas industry, addressing those environmental and societal issues, moving from not only just a license to operate, but getting into an invitation to operate by those different communities. Over the past 4 years, we've done 40 field trials, not only here in Texas, but across the United States and actually around the world. We actually assisted the government of Ukraine to develop their gas shale development strategy back about 5 years ago. So we get involved in site selection, well integrity, water issues, air emissions, as well as societal issues.
Great.
I'd like to make one more comment
Sure.
here. It was very interesting. I read a column yesterday that was talking about the science guy, Bill Nye. And he was talking about what his primary mission is to address right now this time that we're living in of anti-science. And that's similar to what we're doing, is to get out there with that unbiased science so that policymakers, regulators, and all can look at what is that science behind things.
Great. And that's a great segue too into kind of where I think Dr. Payne may have left off too, this idea that when we're talking about drilling and fracking and energy production in general, it seems like this is a very polarized debate, as I guess we saw from the earlier panel as well. I'm wondering, Dr. Payne, can you talk a little bit about that, and I don't know how maybe, is there something that scientists should do more to get that word out about how nuanced of an issue this is, that there are responsible ways to do this? Or what are your thoughts about that?
I gotta apologize that I didn't get all of your question.
Oh, sure. I guess can you talk about, you had mentioned that...
No, that part I got it.
Oh,
The back end of it.
Yeah, is there something that, scientists, experts like y'all can do to, I guess, push that message out, or is it just kind of on us as maybe journalists or, politicians to be honest about what they're reading?
I think one of the main concerns I have in that regard is that addressing fracking, because as an artificial process, practice, that's imposed on a very complicated natural medium and interacts with an even more complicated and broader natural medium. The reality is that the arguments with respect to advocacy for either side of the debate is that in terms of scientific information, we're way behind. We don't have sufficient scientific information to provide definitive answers on this. is fracking safe? Is fracking not safe? Well, probably it's safe sometimes and it's not safe sometimes. And the concerns that I have is that, I guess, in practical terms, fracking is here to stay. It's not going away. That then leaves us with another question. Well, if it's here to stay, then it becomes fundamentally important to determine when and where can it be done safely, and when and where can it not be done, or should it not be done, should it not be risked. And I haven't seen any efforts, and I'm speaking out of place because I don't really know what industry is doing. The industry is quite secretive about what it's doing. But industry itself is a treasure trove of data that we cannot see. As scientists, we don't get to see it. And it seems to me we're at a point now, political, cultural, legislative, or recent election results, that the political environment is now different. And industry is going to have basically what it wants. Regulations are going to be cut back. And industry is really in a position where it's going to be, it should step up to the plate in the sense of, you're now going to be given the opportunity to do the right thing and police yourself.
And yeah, transparency
But if
is
you're going to do it,
definitely.
you have not indicated that you grasp what it is you're dealing with. You have not indicated that you have the science that's thorough enough for that.
Dr. Haut, looks like
Yeah,
you
I'd like
want
to jump in here. There's a couple of things that's ongoing. First of all, I think of the Restore Act and the funding that academia, other people are getting from the Restore Act. They are required, through the website, you can go to a website and see any project that's been funded, who's working on it, and all. So they have that requirement. Secondly, there's a requirement too now for the scientific data to follow the papers that are published. So we have an obligation now, if I get funding from a certain organization, that I have to put up all the data someplace on a website so other people have access to that data. Third item that I want to mention here is that there's the Research Partnership to Secure Energy for America, REPSI. REPSI right now is working with the EPA, working with the Department of Energy, working with industry to look at a program to look at marginal wells. They are looking at how to ensure you have quality control for all the teams that are going out to do air emissions measurements for marginal wells, how to ensure that we have the transparency behind the data as well. So all that's being set up front before the program even begins. So I've seen over my 40 years involvement here, an involvement in terms of transparency. At first, I started my career at Exxon, and it was, we know everything, everybody else doesn't know a darn thing kind of approach. And over my 2.5 decades working with them, that evolved to eventually, okay, we're going to start telling you some of the stuff that we're doing here and all that. But now it's really much, how do you engage the public, concerned citizens, everybody from the beginning, and get that to that point where you're actually sharing the data on that. We heard about community partnership research earlier today. That's a step in a direction. I like to see how that evolves, because I'd be concerned, what about, okay, I got this people out there, my quality control of that data coming in, and being sure that that meets that criteria on there. So there's some checks and balances process here, just like what we have in the federal government in terms of what they do, that we as a scientific community also need to do in terms of our peer review.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think one thing, is, as if people are calling scientists to be this third-party voice, to be this liaison for information going on, scientists need to know the answers or have an understanding, and that's where research comes in. And to answer some of these questions, beyond just the broadest, is hydraulic fracturing safe? Some of the research can be quite difficult. We've talked to agencies that are ecstatic that they've been able to get a gallon of produced water, and whoever they got it from said, don't tell anyone you got it from me, like this stuff was contraband, but this is everyday waste that's traveling the roads. And some of that ability to, expand the research, have have an opportunity for academic scientists or independent scientists to be able to do this is, you know, I haven't been in the oil industry for 40 years, obviously. But the guys that are, they know all about it. And I'm trying to discreetly and robustly answer the stuff that they know. And so in a way, you know, we've had interactions through Apache Corporation, through some work out in West Texas. And just walking through the labs with them, discussing the current research we're doing, why we're looking at metals, off the cuff, these guys that do it every day, they go, oh, well, are you looking for this metal and this metal? And of course, we naively and somewhat understandably go, well, should we? And, you know, we know the answer. And they lead into an explanation of, oh, well, you know, it's pretty exclusive to formations and, you know, things that they deal with every day. But, you know, we just don't easily come across, especially, you know, in the realm of academia, that can be such a broad perspective there.
Well, I had a question for Dr. Jackson, but it looked like we lost him, but maybe I'll set it up and one of y'all can answer it. You know, some of his research, as a journalist, I've been particularly interested in it because a lot of times, you know, people want us to write about the yay fracking or no fracking question, but as y'all mentioned, energy extraction is much more than just fracking, and it's much more complicated than that. And I've been really interested in some of Dr. Jackson's research that looked at, you know, where contamination actually came from. You know, where fracking may have where some folks thought fracking may have been the problem, but in reality it was leaky wells, for instance, or, you know, a lot of folks are focused on disposal well and waste injection and things like that. I'm wondering, is the fact that fracking is a catchy term, is that almost a problem for the way that we think about energy extraction, because so many folks are thinking that they're equating the whole process with fracking and kind of confusing what's going on? If anybody wants to jump in.
I'll jump in there. One of the things that we've learned through our social perception studies is that we use the words hydraulic fracturing. And we keep using the words hydraulic fracturing because that's what it really refers to. There's a drilling process, there's a completion process, there's a hydraulic fracturing process. So that's the number one key issue on there. And the other thing to consider, what we want to look at is the entire life cycle of energy itself. And when you start thinking about that, and you think about natural gas and how much natural gas we have, there's somewhere between 2/3 to 3/4 of that comes because of hydraulic fracturing. And then you think about the benefits of that in terms of reduction in particulate matter and reduction of other pollutants as well concerning that. I can't remember which speaker was talking about point source methane leak. I think it was Scott Tinker that mentioned that yeah, you go out there and tighten it up. So let's look at what are the technologies so that what gets measured gets done, what gets identified gets dealt with on that. So if you take a FLIR camera out there and you see a major leak, we'll bag it and measure what that flow rate is. Look at those control technologies then to address that particular issue.
Right.
I agree with everything that, pardon me for cutting the name, that you said, but the flip side of that from my perspective is that, and this is probably based on the cases that I worked on. It's one of the things that become very apparent to me in this discourse is, and it's typical. It's not that it's restricted to this. First of all, fracking is a loaded term. It makes and trying to distinguish it by spinning off another term that's restricted to your use does not change the fact that fracking is a loaded term, and that's what everybody's going to be talking about, and it means whatever it means to them.
Sure, but it doesn't mean I have to use it.
Correct.
Right.
And you need to be clear for your purposes.
Correct.
But that doesn't help resolve the other issue. The concern that I have is that there's what I've come to see is kind of like before the question came up, the human side of these things. And you can sit in, for example, a railroad commissioner's position, and for many reasons, not have any contact or conception of what the human side of that is like. You can sit as an impacted individual on a property where you've got methane, natural gas coming up out of your water well, and you have a very different perspective. And as a scientist who goes in and gets addressed by both of these parties, I have come to find that the urgency with which this thing is progressing, because as soon as prices change one way or the other, the rate of drilling of new wells is going to increase, it's going to move. But whatever's going on in terms of actual contamination out there, and it appears that there is actual contamination out there, whatever's going on, that's going to continue to expand and progress while we sort of work our way through a long, drawn-out process of well-documented and regulated scientific research. And I find that to be a rather difficult problem, because it doesn't do us a whole lot of good 10 or 15 years from now to sit back and say, aha, 10 or 15 years ago, the contamination was occurring, and now we know it. Because by that time, that exponential curve has gone up. The damage has expanded along with the expansion of the practices.
And I'll just sneak in a question that we have from the audience, and if any of y'all else have questions, I guess raise your hand and you can get a note card. We have a question that mentions, Dr. Payne talked about all sides of these issues trying to quote science in their own way, and we saw a speaker earlier present some well-designed studies that showed higher levels of all leukemia, birth defects, and other risks in drilling sites. And I guess the question is directed at maybe Dr. Haut or anyone else. How is industry really taking a look at some of the health studies from these areas and acknowledging that some of these health risks from drilling and fracking in different areas, or how, and if they aren't, is there a way that the public or researchers who are doing this research should be addressing those in talking with industry to mitigate risks?
Sure. I'll go ahead and mention a couple of things. I know that industry in the past has looked at silica issues. There's been some NIOSH studies, and in particular about how to minimize the amount of silica dust out at a hydraulic fracturing site. Of course, when you think about that, it's the workers more on site than elsewhere that has those particular issues. And so they've done a lot of research on that and a lot of good control technology concerning those particular items. I know that my sponsors, my industry sponsors that I have, and that includes Hess, Chevron, Statoil, Shale, to name a few of them, are looking at on their own about these other health impacts. They haven't engaged us at all within our consortium. I have talked to their folks, and I know that they are addressing those.
So you feel like they are getting.
Yeah, and I would also say, even just beyond health impacts, but just in general, they keep a pretty tight watch on, their public appearance, what's going on, especially if they presume an area to be politically charged per se. We're doing work out in Balmoral, West Texas. There were some discussions earlier, and in our discussions with Apache and mostly their communications team and public relations, we'll have calls with them, and they'll make mentions to, we saw that post on Facebook. We saw in their newspaper that yes, there is a town hall meeting. So there's a lot of things that they're keeping an eye on. Obviously, the health issues, findings, things like that. Just to throw a story in there, my father-in-law retired from a major operating company, and our very first study, which was just 100 water wells, Barnett Shale, You know, we don't do any sort of pointing fingers or anything. You know, there's so many wells, you really can't tie back anything. Somehow our paper shows up on his desk in Singapore, and somebody saying, hey, have you seen this? And, you know, no one making the familial connection or anything, but just, hey, here's pertinent information that we may want to know about. So yeah, I would say that, you know, they at least come across it, either prepare to refute it in some cases, or hey, let's talk to a few guys and get a little bit more explanation because this may come up in conversations. But yeah.
Dr. Payne, any thoughts about that?
You asked the question, and as I heard this, and I guess I'm playing the naysayer there fairly frequently. The thing that popped into my mind is that I was giving a comment to the Science Research Panel of the Science Advisory Board of the EPA on the hydrofracking study. And one of the things that just came into my head about that was that my impression, now I was not on the panel, I was merely providing comments to the panel, but my impression from the comments that the panel made was that industry has either been not forthcoming with information that they have, or, I mean, even to the sense of even, you know, the issue of proprietary ingredients in their fracking fluids as an example. That's just one example. But the other thing is that what is often done is when there is a challenge of some kind, that this is not safe or that is not safe, then what is done is simply to invoke whatever literature values are currently accepted by the EPA. And if you look into those literature values, you often find that those are pretty much guesses. We don't really have, I mean, simply put, you can't go out and select a bunch of human beings and get them to volunteer to be poisoned so we can determine what the toxicity level of this compound is. I mean, that's just nuts. And we're kind of stuck in this position where we do best guesses, and EPA has some well-developed methods to look into that. But everybody just kind of like defers off and says, nah, you just go to the EPA numbers, which basically leaves us where? And so if there is things being done by specific company, that's great. I think it's excellent because the work simply hasn't been done for us. Another issue of an area of science that fracking factors into, that the information that we have is simply inadequate. We don't have the answers. And that is kind of troubling in a way.
And so we have a comment from the audience that is meant to spur a discussion. It's very, very closely along these lines, so I will read it and then maybe add a little bit extra for y'all to discuss. There's a comment that good science coupled with partners' ability to take action and execute operationally is what is lacking in the industry, this person believes. And he or she was looking for a comment on that, suggesting that good science often doesn't lead to appropriate action. And I guess taking that further, I've noticed in some of my reporting, there's often these kind of new groundbreaking studies that have some interesting findings. Again, in looking at some of the things I cover in Texas, it might be findings suggesting that a cracked well led to methane contamination somewhere in the Barnett Shale. So we report on it, and then we typically get, try to get some response from the Texas Railroad Commission, and it's often tough because on the one hand, this is a new study, they have to review it, so how much can they immediately comment on it and say, yes, we accept that, we're going to take action. But so I guess I wonder if, is there an issue with science? Is this ever-growing body? Science on certain issues can be settled. For instance, that climate change is warming the planet. But there's always new science and there's always new research into certain issues. So is there kind of is there ever a problem with regulators who might point to the changing nature of science and say, oh, we need more evidence. This isn't 100% proven, because science is always sort of like your best educated guess based upon the facts. Is that an inherent problem with the interaction between science and maybe regulators or industry?
I'll just take
Yeah.
I'm having real trouble hearing because the speaker's going back,
Okay.
but I think I got the point of the question. And I'm going to try to turn your question around in the form of sort of an answer. And if anybody knows better, please speak up. I thought it was really kind of relevant here that you bring up the question of effectively climate science. It's being thoroughly studied. A lot of money has been put into it. There are large international commissions working on it. Do we have anything similar to that for the issue of unconventional oil? Is there anything, any kind of international commission of scientists, a collection of scientists who get together and agree that we're going to collaborate collectively, and each of us is going to bring our own expertise, and we're going to look at this in a big, holistic way and try to understand this?
Well, there is the National Academy of Sciences that Elizabeth Ida is currently heading up that has a roundtable of looking at unconventional.
How many people are on it?
Oh, gosh, 24, 30?
And how long did it last?
It's still going on, as far
Okay.
as I know.
Yeah,
And
so,
there's,
how many scientists are
it's
looking
all
at
different
what?
stakeholders.
Pardon?
It's all different stakeholders. There's, I'm sure, Michael Teague, the Secretary of Energy from Oklahoma's on it. There's a Sierra Club member I know. There's a Nature Conservancy member on it. Environmental Defense Fund has a member on it. So there's lots of those. Richard Saline runs one for water itself. He's got 20 or so people on his roundtable, on that. Through our environmentally friendly drilling program, it's, we got roughly 30 or so different academia. We have a monthly phone call that we have 35 academians and national lab people that are on our invite list for a monthly call to discuss issues and who's working on what, where are the proposals coming in at, which teams can be formed in order to address certain key aspects of that. If one of our sponsors has a particular issue, whether it be in the an unconventional or conventional development or offshore or onshore, they let me know about this particular issue. I bring it up to that roundtable discussion that we have in our monthly call and see who can address it. That's how we got our team together to get funding from the Department of State to address development of the unconventional program for Ukraine. And we had members from University of Leoben in Austria on that, as well as Colorado School of Law people on there. And that all came about because of our monthly phone call. So there are ways of getting people together to form these teams to address those issues.
I guess that
That's three
says what
examples.
can be done.
It's 3 examples of what's currently being done.
Yeah, well, that's fine. And I'm glad of that. What I guess I'm trying to get to, and you mentioned it earlier, if I understood you correctly. One of the issues that we have in scientific publications on fracking and its impact is the difficulty of adequate peer review.
Yes.
Qualified, adequate peer reviewers
Quality control.
who can review a paper that's about to be published or not be published, but a paper that's about to be published and wave a red flag and say, wait a minute, this point here is you're going in the wrong direction.
It's a process, yes.
And so, which gets me back to your question, which is a lot of hullabaloo comes up every time a new paper comes out.
Yeah.
And one time it may go one way, and the other time the paper may go the other way. And in my experience, either in when I myself am either asked or just because I'm interested to read the paper, it's like, oops, it should have been corrected in the first place. But now, because it's already been published, it's out there. It has become a new chapter in the epistle. And I am concerned over this sort of, once the Bible's long enough, nobody goes back to change the early books. We seem to be accumulating a lot of either mutually contradictory information or scientific literature that frankly wasn't right when it came out. It should have been caught in peer review. And I'm troubled by that.
Yes.
And
So am I.
And I guess with that biblical reference, I think we're going to have to wrap up. We are out of time, but that's the one that you can linger over the room for a little while and think about the full body of science that's out there. Could y'all give these folks a round of applause?